I have to tell you, when you're preaching on the Sabbath or any other subject, you often look in the hymnal. I try to look for some hymns that might connect with painting. And there's no category listed under Sabbath whatsoever. There's just not a category in the index of the Bible, which tells you a few things about how little how unseriously we take the whole idea. And that song's about Sabbath, and apparently it came out of a woman sitting around on her porch watching her dog on a lazy day, and got inspired to create something. But she wasn't doing something else. But thank you, Combo, that was really beautiful. I'll tell you, the first time I ever realized that anybody in my world took the Sabbath seriously was back when I was a freshman in college. I'd been cast in a musical being produced by a company called Gallery Players, and the Players were one of many cultural programs run by the Jewish Center over on the east side of Columbus, Ohio. And it wasn't until we were well into the rehearsal process and thinking about opening night that I discovered we would not be performing on Friday nights. I was shocked. Not do the show on a Friday night, it's a weekend night, for heaven's sake. One of the two most attended and lucrative nights to perform. Nobody I knew observed the Sabbath like that. I mean, some people went to church that I knew. Of course. Families did things together on the weekend. I remember many Sundays when our family got together with our grandparents. We'd take long drives in the country, followed by a meal at a favorite restaurant. But shutting down your theater to observe the Jewish Sabbath, this was very different. This was strange. It was sacrificial. It was radically countercultural. It was brave. I found myself admiring my Jewish hosts. They were doing something for heaven's sake and for their own sakes. And in the next 20 years, I went on to become good friends with quite a few people at the Jewish Center. And that theater is still dark on Friday nights, and I think that's a beautiful thing. As it turns out, as I mentioned last week, it is a book by a Jewish author that has really helped me reevaluate the concept of Sabbath. For us, for myself. The book is called The Sabbath World, A Different Order of Time, by a woman named Judith Shulevitz. It's only recently published. Now, Judith grew up religiously skeptical. She didn't come from a super devout Jewish family, but she knew people that went to synagogue. She herself didn't. Then sometime in her early adult years, she began wondering if there might not be a wisdom, and perhaps even a value, to keeping the Sabbath. Her book is partly a record of all of her attempts to do so, but mostly an excellent history of both Jewish and Christian Sabbath practices. Today, I want us to consider this. I want us to think about a way, anyway, to add some serious Sabbath time to our busy lives. I think we need to look at it creatively. We shouldn't fear that we won't do it perfectly, because we won't. After all, it was Jesus himself who famously said the Sabbath was made for humankind, and not humankind for the Sabbath. If it doesn't help you, then let it go, but it might help. I suggest we see it as a possible gift, and certainly not as a burden. Last week, for any of you who weren't here, I tried to paint a picture of just how crazy busy many of our lives have become. And I know that that concept resonates with so many of you. I described the nearly impossible life of working mothers. They were one of my major examples of how utterly overscheduled one can be without any time for oneself. I shared that somebody I know once told me that they were so busy and overscheduled that they found themselves being envious of people who were really sick. Why? Well, because people who were really sick actually had permission to do absolutely nothing. I'm sure they are the only person who has felt that way. I shared the results of studies that revealed that while we may actually be working less than we did 15 years ago, which most of us find shocking, we feel like we are working more. And I promised that we would explore the concept of Sabbath and see if it still has anything to offer. What I did not do last week was actually look at the fourth commandment. And I'd like to begin there. Judith Shulevitz offers a very short version of that fourth commandment. Stop working at the same time, stop working at regular intervals. The fourth commandment says to me, stop, pause, and rest. If you listen carefully, you may note that it also says, not just you, but your friends, people you know, anybody who works for you, and the slaves that you might own, which of course many people did during the Old Testament times. There's something egalitarian about the Sabbath, but most importantly, it's a communal event. It's not just an individual event, it's meant for an entire society, or culture, or a group of people, or a tribe to pull off and to keep. Now, I know some of you mourn the days when stores were closed on Sunday and when kids' sports were never played on Sunday. Comes up in conversation all the time. You might find it interesting to know that the fourth commandment was just as countercultural to the ancient Hebrews as it is to us. Consider when this was given, probably sometime 2000 to 3000 BCE. That's probably when Moses had his encounter with God on Mount Sinai. Or when the Hebrews first started writing down the Ten Commandments. And then around about the 8th century BCE, there's one of the famous Old Testament prophets named Amos. And in Amos's book, he really goes after people who don't observe the Sabbath. And he talks about those who are dying and trying to do business before the Sabbath is really quite over on Sunday or Saturday evening, since the Jewish Sabbath is followed from Friday evening to Saturday evening. So even in the 8th century BCE, there were people complaining about those folks that can't keep the Sabbath. Another perspective might be that even in the 8th century BC, there were merchants that were trying to squeeze every possible amount of profit out of the time that they had, or workaholics who couldn't set aside to work long enough to actually practice the Sabbath. Even in the 8th century BCE. What are we supposed to do on the Sabbath when we're not working? The Bible doesn't say. The commandment doesn't say. But some people have tried to answer that question by imagining what exactly God might have done on that seventh day. And I won't bore you with everything, but there are many, many interesting tales, especially the rabbis have conceived, of what God might have been doing on day 7. One guess, and one that I think we can really work with, I found in Shulevitz's book. God stopped to show us that what we create becomes meaningful only once we stop creating it and start remembering why it was worth creating in the first place. And then Shulevitz goes on to share a sentence that I dearly love. We have to remember to stop because we have to stop to remember. It says that the very time away from work is what gives life meaning, including meaning to the work that we do. I think of it like a line break in a poem, or it's a moment of silence in a piece of music. The pause, the silence, the rest, they give structure and meaning to what came before and to what comes after. Otherwise, it all just runs together. Maybe we desperately need the perspective that time away from working can give us. Perhaps we need to see the value of what we've done. And perhaps we can only see that value when we step away, when we pause, when we reflect on it. When we do not pause, when we do not rest, when we do not stop, then all of our busyness begins to just run together. It becomes constant busyness without differentiation. I know many of us find ourselves, at least certain days of the week, living life that way. It's the treadmill. It's the hamster wheel. Hardly time to reflect on what you've done before the next thing comes down the pipe. And I notice, and I know you've noticed, that the harder you try when you're living like that, the less satisfied you are. The less happy you are. The less joyful you are. But even the very things that you've devoted yourself to cease to give you satisfaction. As Shulevitz says, we need to spend time intentionally not working so that we can become the kind of people that work might have prevented us from being. Nothing against work, and we're all going to work, at least for some time. But our work should help make our lives possible. Our work should not be the sole reason for our lives. Jews and Christians alike have devoted their Sabbath time to precisely those needs that are not met by working. On Sabbath, you often study your scriptures. You pay attention to your faith. You retell your cultural story, your family story. I remember wandering around the fields of Ohio with my parents and my grandparents. That's when I learned a lot about who we were, listening to stories on Sunday afternoon. Sabbath is often a time to learn new things. And learning pops up again and again. People with intellectual hobbies, or people that take classes. There's nothing wrong with learning on the Sabbath if it's not considered a certain type of work. The Sabbath allows you to spend time with yourself. It allows you to spend time with your spouse. It allows you to spend time with your family. Well, that all sounds so trite and so obvious. But ask yourself, how many families today really have much unstructured time to spend together? Unstructured time. Time when anything can happen. Time when something new might happen.